Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy Hook Promise's webinar on safe storage. We're about to get started. We'll just give it a couple minutes as folks get online here. Thanks for joining us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy Hook Promise's webinar on safe storage. If you're joining us and chatting in, we are about to get started. We're just giving folks just about 60 seconds more to join, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for being with us. All right, it is 12:03, so we're going to go ahead and kick things off here. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you again for being with us. We really appreciate you taking the time in your day to be with us with this important subject area. We have a lot of great panelists on this call today, and we're excited to share more about safe storage and firearm safety during COVID-19. So as we get started, I want to start off with a few quick technology tips for using GoToWebinar today. As you join, you are automatically on mute, so you won't have the opportunity to speak. That just helps us control folks' background noise and any interfering noise you might have in the, going on your end. Instead, what you can do is use the questions box function. It's on the right hand or on the bottom of your screen. If you post a question there, we have staff on our end who are prepared to answer your questions, help you out as you may need. If we're not able to answer your questions, we will do everything we can to follow up with you. If you need to get in touch with us during the duration of the presentation, our email address is advocacy@sandyhookpromise.org. And that's the best way to reach out to us if you need any information. We will be recording this webinar. It's recording currently as I'm speaking, and everybody who's on this call right now will be able to access the recording after it's done, so you'll get a copy of this later. A couple of things I'll mention as well. During this presentation, although we can't see you and we may not be able to have a conversation with you, we do want to interact with you, so we'll be using the poll function. That means that a poll will pop up on your screen at the right time, and we'll ask you to answer the question directly to get a little bit of a gauge of how much you know and how much you think is going on with safe storage. If you are joining by phone, welcome. You may email us for a copy of the PowerPoint. We're happy to send that to you so you can follow along. Again, the email address is advocacy@sandyhookpromise.org. We're happy to send you what you need from there. I'm going to start things off with introductions here. So my name is Nalini Ramachandran. I am the National Engagement Manager with Sandy Hook Promise. I manage and oversee our grassroots programs and our grassroots outreach, and I'm excited to have you all here. I'm also joined by some wonderful colleagues and partners. I'm going to kick it over now to Liz Murphy.
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Murphy. I am the National Policy Director for Sandy Hook Promise. I work with our partners at both the state and federal level on policies in the areas of gun violence prevention, mental health, and education. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Crifasi.
Hi, I'm Cass Crifasi. I'm an assistant professor in the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm also the deputy director of our Center for Gun Policy and Research. Really happy to be here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Song. I am the mother of Eakin Song, who was killed in 2018 with a unsecured firearm at our neighbor's house.
And I'm Alex Santorcio. I'm the training and program manager for the Northeast region of Sandy Hook Promise. So essentially I work on program delivery and design.
Thank you all. We're also joined today by one of Sandy Hook Promise's co-founders and managing directors, Mark Barden. I'd like to turn things over for Mark for just a few words to our audience as we get started here.
Thank you, Nalini, and thank you for hosting this great series of webinars. I think they're really good and really informative, and I hope folks who are listening and attending are getting a lot out of this, and we look forward to some conversation and questions afterwards. It's also an honor to be joined by this great panel and to be part of this great panel of folks with various different experience and expertise in this subject. I am a career musician. In 2012, I lost my son Daniel, who was shot to death in his first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And since that time, have become a co-founder and managing director of Sandy Hook Promise as we work diligently to prevent other families from having to live the pain of losing a loved one to gun violence, and look forward to exploring this very important and crucial component to that effort of safe storage with you all today.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to turn things over to Liz now to introduce us to the topic of safe storage and some guiding principles as we begin deep diving.
Thanks, Nalini. So we just wanted to start off by talking about what we mean when we say safe storage. We're really primarily talking about two different things. The first are practices, so best practices for safely storing a firearm. We're going to go into this in much more detail with Dr. Crifasi, but generally we mean that the firearm is stored safely, so it's either in a locked case or a locked box or a safe, that it's stored separate or away from ammunition, and also that it can't be found by others. And that part's really, really important. So we're talking about people that are prohibited legally from being able to access a firearm, people that are in crisis that shouldn't be able to access a firearm, and also, and for us, perhaps most importantly, children, so minors. Along with that, we're also second talking about laws and policies that deal with safe storage. And those can take a few different forms. So first of all, there are laws and policies that can come down from the federal government. So things that are passed by Congress or initiatives that are undertaken by the president or his administration. There are also laws that can be passed at the state level through state legislatures, through governors, also in the form of ballot initiatives. And what's actually part of those safe storage laws, though, or policies can vary as well. So it can be requirements or best practices for how you must legally store a firearm. It can also be things of an educational nature. So for example, saying that at the point of sale of a firearm, people need to be informed about what the risks are that are associated with owning a firearm, and also what best practices are for safe storage or even options that are available for purchase in order to secure that firearm in the home. So there are different ways. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of those laws and policies later on as well. So why as an organization do we engage on safe storage? Why do we care about this? Our mission at Sandy Hook Promise is really to keep kids and their families safe. And we want to do that whether they're at school, whether they're in the home, or whether they're out and about in their community. And we know that the research behind safe storage shows why that is such a key part of keeping kids and their families safe. In 3/4 of school shootings, the gun that is used comes from either the shooter's home or that of a relative. With children under the age of 10 that live in a home with an unsecured firearm, 73% of them report knowing where that firearm is, and 36% of those kids report handling it when it's unsecured. We know that just overall, unsecured firearms increase risk for youth in a home. Over 75% of firearms that are used in youth suicide attempts or in accidental or unintentional shootings of youth come from either the victim's home or that of a relative or a friend. So right now, as so many of us are home with children and families, everyone is all together in the home even more, safe storage has just become increasingly critical, and we need to make sure that we understand it, that our neighbors understand it, and that our relatives understand it. So as we're doing more hand washing, we're doing more disinfecting, we also need to be doing more safe storage practices. It's all part of keeping our families and our kids safe and healthy.
Thanks,
That,
Liz.
I'm going to turn it back to Melina.
Great, thank you. I'm going to launch our first poll now. As Liz mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what you should know about safe storage right now and what you should know about the issue as a whole. So we're going to launch our first question here, and you can go ahead. You should see that popping up on your screen, and go ahead and select the answer that you think is correct. The question there is, in 2015, how many children lived in homes where at least one gun was stored, loaded, and unlocked? I see folks are responding here. All right, I'm going to give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you all. So the responses were a little bit split here. So we got 35% saying it was 4.6 million, 32% said it was 3.8, 29% said it was 2.9, and 3% said it was 1.4 million. So the correct answer is actually the highest one. 4.6 million children as of 2015 live in homes where at least one gun was stored, loaded, and unlocked. So that takes us to the next part of this presentation, which is what you need to know about the current situation around safe storage. So we already know now that 4.6 children in normal situations, under normal circumstance, live in homes where at least one gun is stored unsecurely. Now, there are more children that are home than ever. That's one of these important factors that we're paying attention to. It's important to note that we're currently living in this situation, so research may not be produced at live as we're going, but we are noticing things and we are receiving reports and noticing trends that are shifting, and that is what informs the best practices and changing nature of this situation. So the first one, again, is that more children are home than ever. The latest estimates show that approximately 50 million children across the United States are out of their school buildings. They may be taking classes at home, they may be completing assignments at home, but 50 million children are not going to a school building every day. There's also a large uptick in gun purchases. So there were approximately 2 million guns purchased in March of 2020, just about 2 months ago, when the pandemic really shifted and folks started to stay at home and follow those stay-at-home orders. 2 million guns were purchased, making it the second highest ever month in history that volume of guns were purchased. It's important to also note that many of these purchasers were first-time purchasers. So folks who had never owned a gun before were now incentivized or now felt a need to purchase new guns, which also contributed to this uptick. The last factor I want to point out is that there is also reduced access to training. So right now we know that most folks are staying at home. Many businesses have closed or are providing their services virtually or online. That applies to some of these training programs around safe firearm storage as well. So while folks might still be receiving some access, we know that it's reduced in its capacity, and there might be fewer folks who are getting the full brunt of the education that they need to get around safe storage and how to properly operate and how to properly store and secure their firearms. There are 3 things I want to keep in mind for folks as we move throughout this presentation on how things are shifting and what we're paying attention to when it comes to safe storage. So we're also noticing a lot shifting with students and youth too, along with adults and their purchasing habits. So I'm going to pass it off to Alex now to touch a little bit more on what Sandy Hook Promises is paying attention to on the student and youth side.
Great, thanks, Nalini. So one of the programs that Sandy Hook Promise offers is Say Something, and this ties specifically into our Say Something anonymous reporting system. So with Say Something, we educate students on how to look for warning signs and threats, act immediately and take it seriously, and say something to a trusted adult. Our anonymous reporting system comes in when no trusted adult is available. So if a student is perusing Instagram or Snapchat, excuse me, late in the evening, or it's a weekend and they don't have access to a teacher, we encourage them to use our anonymous reporting system. And really what we've seen with this is that we've seen quite a few tips that come in that are linked to firearms. I will say during the time of COVID, we've seen a shift in our percentages of tips that are coming in. We categorize and triage each tip as life safety, which is a tip that would involve immediate need for emergency medical services or law enforcement. We also notify the school. And then our non-life safety tips are tips that go just to the school directly. So we've not only seen an uptick in tips that we categorize as life safety, but we've also seen a shift in our number one category of tip that's coming in. So prior to quarantine, this was bullying, but after quarantine, it's suicide. And the reason I mention suicide specifically is because 2/3 of firearm deaths are suicides. So suicide and safe storage kind of go hand in hand. And while respecting the anonymity of our tipsters, I've had the privilege of working with our anonymous reporting team to have access and take a look at what these tipsters and what these students are seeing out there live and right now. And there are two tips that particularly come to mind here to, again, just drive home how crucial it is always, but particularly right now, that we practice good, safe storage. The first is a tip related to suicide. A young person accessed our anonymous reporting system, was very concerned about an immediate suicide risk for a friend. And when one of our really fantastic crisis center counselors worked with this student, one of the first things they asked was, do you know if your friend has access to a firearm? And without question, they said yes. They have an unsecured firearm in their home. They have it with them in their room. The last text message they sent me was, talking about pulling the trigger. So we are seeing the immediate and crucial impact of availability of unsecured firearms. So, and that's on one side of this issue. Another side is thinking of school attacks or hurting somebody else in addition to, or instead of hurting yourself. And I have two tips that I've seen here. One was prior to COVID, a student actually brought a gun into school, and our anonymous reporting system allowed that student to take a photo and submit it anonymously. So law enforcement and school staff were notified right away, and a potential crisis or tragedy was averted. We also see students who, prior to or in the planning phase, will take photos of themselves with a firearm or caption a photo discussing whether or not they're going to bring a firearm to school. And in each case, the tipster very easily is able to say, yes, I've been to their house before. Yes, I've seen the firearm, or I know that their parents have guns. So what we're encouraging students to do, which I'll touch on in a little bit, with Say Something is when we talk about look for warning signs and threats, we mean of all types of violence. So that's threats to oneself or threats to somebody else. But what we really want to encourage students to do, and anonymously give them a platform to do, is express that availability or discomfort. If somebody has access to a firearm or that ease of access is concerning to them, we're giving them a space where they can feel safe and come forward without feeling uncomfortable about having to approach another adult who does have that unsecured firearm in the home. So really, Say Something and our anonymous reporting system is giving students a space to be able to talk about that and really empowering them to save a life.
Thanks so much, Alex. So as you heard from Alex, at the end of the day, this is about human life, and this is about preventing violence and saving lives. And that's very much the case for gun violence prevention as a whole, including safe storage. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Kristen Song to tell us a little bit more about her story and the importance of safe storage.
Good morning. I just wanted to read you something that I had written probably about a week after Ethan was killed. It kind of illustrates the old me and the new me. I saw a woman last year. Her eyes had a sparkle. Her posture was relaxed. Her movements were deliberate and full of energy. She smiled, laughed, and loved to tell anyone who would listen, "Seize the day." She lived her life that way. She begged for a third child. Her husband did not understand at first that she was not done bringing life into this world. Her third child was born on a beautiful winter day. Her family was complete. She felt at peace. She used to tell people her heart grew 3 sizes that day. The pleasures in her life were her family. Her greatest joys were her children. She used to sit back and just watch them and smile to herself. Ah, life is good. Her heart was full of gratitude because she knew she was blessed. She was a confident mother. She took her job as a mother seriously and worked hard on making sure her 3 children felt loved and cherished. Her most treasured moments were when her family was all together, at dinner time, vacation, or trapped in the car. She loved the noise, but she also loved when the house was quiet and the children were tucked in their beds. They were safe. She did her job. Her children grew into teenagers and she fell more in love with them, even when she received phone calls like, "Mom, I'm okay, but I totaled the car." Or, "Mom, don't freak out. I broke my nose in 3 places." Or when the school called and asked if her third child was planning on handing in any homework this year. She knew these were trials in their lives, but they were surmountable and good learning lessons for her children. They were becoming offshoots of her, and she marveled at their personalities, their dreams, kindness, and yes, grumpiness. She told them over and over, "There's nothing this family can't get through together." I saw a woman on January 31st, 2018. Her son got up excited to finally get his braces off, another milestone in his life. The woman and her son went out to celebrate over breakfast. Her beautiful boy told her about his dreams, his hopes, and his plans for the future. He wanted to go to Rice University, join the military, marry, and have 7 children. He wanted his house filled with music and laughter. He said, like his home now. They returned home, and her son asked if he could go to his best friend's house. He walked out of their home and out of their lives. 45 minutes later, the woman saw 2 police officers crossing her lawn. Her heart sank. They raced to the ER and were escorted into a tiny room. The ER doctor came in and whispered, "Your son is gone. He was shot in the head." The woman was desperate to see her beautiful boy, to let him know that he is loved and cherished, to kiss his forehead, to tuck him in one last time, to tell him that Mommy loves you. She was not allowed to say goodbye. He was unrecognizable. I see a woman, her eyes are dull, her posture slumped, her movement as if by rote. She is in a stupor, getting through the days, but numb of heart, mind, and body. Her smile has turned to tears, her energy is gone. She wonders how she will get through the day. The physical pain is so intense it is hard for her to breathe. The things that used to bring her pleasure and great joy are chased away to the furthest parts of her mind. They are terrifying reminders of what used to be. She no longer thinks about vacations, summer evenings under the stars, or Christmas mornings. All those pleasures have been sacrificed just to survive. Life is a roller coaster of emotions, ranging from panic attacks, anxiety over what will happen to her other children, and disbelief that her life is now shattered into a million pieces. She doesn't sleep much, and when she does, he visits her at night, calling to her. She frantically runs around like a caged animal trying to get to her beautiful boy, but he slips from her fingers and slowly fades away. A noise wakes her up and she realizes she is sobbing and wailing, "Why, God? Please tell me why, my beautiful boy." She would have happily traded places with him in an instant. She's caught between 2 worlds, the one her beautiful boy is in now and the one her living family is in. She stretches her arms, but she can't hold on to all of her children at once. She gets up dreading another day without her son. She has failed as a mother. She sits with her coffee in the kitchen and contemplates suicide. Ah, that sounds lovely. No more pain. Her other son grabs her hand and says, "I would not survive if I lost another member of this family." How did he know? Was it that obvious? She now knows she has no other choice but to live. The woman that was once vibrant, happy, optimistic, warm, and loving finds it necessary to withdraw into herself to just protect her emotional stability. She isolates herself. It has affected more than just her. It has affected her prized possessions, her husband, and her children. Not only is she dealing with her own heartache, she is also trying to help them deal with theirs. The gun owner, Dan Markle, was our neighbor. Ethan and his son were best friends since they were 4 years old. Dan Markle stored his 3 guns and ammunition in a white shoebox. He was not charged. The law at the time in Connecticut only required loaded firearms to be secured. The prosecutor felt because the boys had the dexterity to load the gun, she could not prove that the gun was loaded and unsecured. The prosecutor did wait for Dan Markle to step up and take responsibility, but he never did, and she had no choice but to charge his 14-year-old son with manslaughter. His son had already witnessed his best friend dying. He had to make that horrible phone call to 911. He watched as the EMTs fought to keep Ethan alive so that he did not have to be left at the crime scene. He was placed in the back of a police car and brought to the station. How overwhelmed and scared he must have been, and that was just the beginning. Ethan was given a death sentence and his best friend was given a life sentence, and the gun owner, Dan Markle, walked free. I was horrified when Ethan's best friend was charged and Dan Markle, the gun owner, had absolutely no repercussions, not even a fine. I knew at that point the law needed to change. I knew that the law needed to place the responsibility on the gun owner. The law needed to require all gun owners to secure their weapons, whether they are loaded or unloaded. After all, our job as adults is to protect our children. In Connecticut, I worked with the legislator and we passed Ethan's law, which now requires that all firearms, whether loaded or unloaded, must be secured so that inappropriate people and children cannot gain access to them. And we also are fighting for Ethan's law to be passed on a federal level.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I think I echo a lot of people in that this is an incredibly powerful story and just reminds us of how important the safe storage practice and legislation, how they go hand in hand together, and really underscoring the importance of this conversation. So thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Crifasi now to talk us through a little bit more.
Thank you. So we've heard a little bit about data and why safe storage is important, and I just want to spend a few minutes reiterating some of those points and then adding some additional text. So for the last 30 years, there's been a growing body of research that has established that having a gun in the home increases the risk of homicide, suicide, and unintentional shootings. And this is particularly true in homes where there are children and other youth. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for teens aged 13 to 17, and firearms are used in more than 40% of fatal suicide attempts in this age group. In 2018, there were more than 130 unintentional firearm deaths among youth under the age of 21, so people who, depending on the state they're in, might not legally be able to buy a gun themselves, but they're still exposed to them. And as was mentioned previously by Liz, when you look at the sources of guns that are used by adolescents in school shootings, the vast majority come from their home or from another family member. And this just really highlights the need for people to engage in safe storage practices. Guns should be stored safely every time they are out of the immediate possession of the adult gun owner. Safe storage works to limit access to guns by unauthorized users or unsupervised youth. It's a really meaningful intervention that can reduce gun-related injury and death, particularly among children. Some of our national survey data that we've collected found that gun owners who have children in the home are more likely to store all of their guns safely, but we still see fewer than half of people who own guns safely storing them all the time. At least one gun is present in 35 to 40% of homes with children under the age of 18. And as we learned in the poll, the best estimate is that around 4.5 million kids live in homes with at least one gun that's stored unlocked and loaded. Several studies have demonstrated that we can reduce the risk of harm when guns are in the home when they're safely stored. Some states have passed child access prevention laws, which require guns to be stored in a way that limits access to youth in particular. These states have lower rates of gun suicide and unintentional shootings among youth than states without these laws. So we need, as Nalini said, we need to focus on both practices and also policies. Safe storage is increasingly relevant with the surges in gun sales that we've seen in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly, as was mentioned previously, because a lot of this increase is among first-time gun buyers, people who might not have any experience knowing how to safely store or handle these guns, when they can lawfully use them or not. And without this access to proper training, and no offense to online training, but I mean in-person, hands-on training where an instructor can actually show you how to safely ensure your gun is not loaded and how to safely store it, and see that you can do that as well. So this sort of really important in-person training. The increases in gun sales and this lack of training really poses a significant threat to all of our communities and our children in particular. So I have another poll that we're going to do. So before we move on to the next slide, Nalini, can you launch the poll? And so the question is whether you agree that we should require by law that a person lock up their guns at home when not in use to prevent handling by kids when adults are not present. And you can rate it strongly agree down to strongly disagree.
I'll give it another 5 seconds here. Excellent. So looking at the results here, it looks like 90% of folks strongly agreed with that statement, 7% agreed, and 3% felt neutrally. So we'll move on to the next one.
And we can go to the next slide. So I want to share a little bit of public opinion polling data. So our center has been conducting public opinion polling on about 24 specific gun policies every 2 years since January of 2013. Our most recent data collection was in January 2019, and we're actually preparing for our 5th wave to go out in January 2021. We started these surveys in the wake of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting because when we looked at a public opinion on gun policy, there's really nothing high quality that was out there. Most of the polls that existed asked, do you favor or oppose gun control, or do you think our gun laws should be stronger or weaker? In contrast to that, as you'll see when I highlight these 2 questions, we get very specific. We want to get into the details of the policies so that respondents know exactly what we're asking. And also we can then take that information to policymakers and say, look, this is the level of support for this specific policy. And then we can also show them the evidence about why that policy is effective. So we also, excuse me, oversample gun owners because we want to be able to say, are there differences between gun owners and non-gun owners, and just give people a sense of sort of how robust this policy support is. So I'm going to, as I mentioned, highlight these 2 questions here that I think are relevant for today's discussion. First, similar to what just popped up in the poll, we asked respondents whether they favor or oppose requiring by law that a person lock up the guns in their home when not in use to prevent handling by children or teenagers without adult supervision. And you can see that overall, 77% of respondents were in favor. There was lower support at 60% among gun owners, but that's still almost 2/3 of gun owners who support safe storage or child access prevention laws as a requirement. We also asked, sort of thinking about this training piece, whether they favor or oppose requiring first-time gun purchasers to take a safety course on safe handling and storage before buying a gun. And you can see that overall 84% of respondents supported mandatory training for new gun owners, including almost 3/4 of current gun owners. There's a lot of discourse in the media and other places that folks don't agree on solutions to reduce gun violence. And I raise these 2 points as effective strategies that have actually pretty broad support even among gun owners. And these can help us reduce injury and death without infringing on an individual's right to own guns if they choose to do so and if they are not prohibited. These are solutions that lots of folks agree on, including gun owners. So with that, I will turn it back over to Liz.
Thanks. So given that, we want to start talking about some of the tools we have in the toolbox for safe storage. And as I mentioned earlier, laws and policies, both at the state and federal level, are one of those tools. As we just saw through our poll and through the polls that Dr. Crifasi showed, we know that this is something that transcends partisan divides. It has broad political support. And so we're really committed to finding these bipartisan solutions. Earlier, we heard Kristen's story. We were so proud as an organization to stand with Kristen and the Song family in helping support the passage of Ethan's Law in Connecticut. It goes to show you that there are these, common sense policy adjustments that we can make in order to incentivize and change the culture around safe storage. The final vote in the Connecticut State Senate was 34-2. So these are broadly supported. It was signed into law by Governor Lamont in June of 2019. And as Kristen mentioned, there is also a federal version of this bill that we are supporting and are going to continue to advocate for. We really see safe storage laws in combination with expanded background checks and extreme risk protection laws, sometimes called red flag laws, that deal with giving families and police officers the ability to temporarily separate individuals from firearms if they're in crisis, at risk of hurting themselves or someone else. We see background checks, extreme risk protection laws, and safe storage laws together as really a huge key part of reducing gun violence and saving lives across the country. So as we move forward this year, and especially as we move into 2021, where we're going to have a new Congress, we're going to have new state legislatures across the country, please stay tuned. Our policy team, Nalini and myself, and the rest of our team will be sending out action alerts for you so that you can help contact your elected officials and weigh in on these kinds of policies that can really, really make a huge impact. So keep your eye out.
Thanks, Liz. So as Liz has shared, and we've continued to reiterate, there is a toolbox when it comes to solutions around gun violence prevention in general and inclusive of safe storage. Legislation is one of those tools, as is personal practices and interpersonal communication. So we want to spend some more time talking about what these solutions and what the rest of the toolbox looks like. What can adults do? Many of you have sort of started to ask questions, and we hope to answer more of them later on about how individuals can take action in their homes or encourage people in their lives to practice safe storage. In this section, we're going to cover a couple of different things. One is checking in on your friends and family, especially as things are virtual now. We may not be seeing people in person as much, but there's a lot of tools at our disposal to make sure that we're asking questions and that we are taking care of each other. And we encourage safe storage to be one of those conversation topics. And we'll talk a little bit more about some questions you can ask and how you can feel comfortable. We'll also talk a little bit more and encourage you to talk to your kids about firearm safety. So Alex has outlined Say Something and our Say Something anonymous reporting system. There's individual practices and tips that you can incorporate into your life to, again, make yourself feel more comfortable and also feel empowered to ask the right things and create an open line of communication and dialogue with your children and the children in your life. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Crifasi for some more tips.
Thanks. So I wanted to just take a couple of minutes and get really specific and concrete with the way guns could be stored if you have them in the home. There are lots of different ways, and I like to think of safe storage options as sort of a spectrum or a continuum. And you can see that on this arrow here. So at a minimum, guns should always be stored unloaded and separate from ammunition. But as we heard earlier in the webinar, that isn't necessarily enough. If you have children in the home or other high-risk individuals, they may still be able to gain access to them. And often kids are super curious, really good at finding things, and may be able to find something that you think is really well hidden. Next on the spectrum would be using an external locking device, such as a trigger lock or a cable lock. And depending on which one, it may or may not render the gun inoperable. So one concern I have about trigger locks, which is the picture above the arrow, is that guns can still be stored loaded and even with a round in the chamber when a trigger lock is applied to a handgun. And I'll just say I'm using handgun examples on this slide, but many of these apply to other types of firearms long guns as well. In contrast, the picture below the arrow, which is a cable lock, it passes through the gun. So it passes through the magazine well and comes out the ejection port, and you secure it that way. And that makes it so that the gun cannot be loaded while it's locked and basically inoperable until that gun is unlocked, which is a more effective strategy, in my opinion, than using a trigger lock, because that gun could still be loaded. And if it's dropped or something, it could still go off. Next is the use of an internal locking device. So there are devices that will slip into the chamber of a firearm, and you can lock it internally, and then you would lock out both the gun and the key, and this gun cannot be used while it's locked. Gun cases and cabinets can be effective, although some of them are not made of really high quality, and so they can be usually more effective when paired with some other kind of locking device, such as an internal or an external device. And then most effective would be storing your guns in a locked gun safe where only you have access to the key or the code. Gun safes are not effective if the key is just sort of lying around, right? So making sure that that key is held safely. But no matter how guns are stored, they should be stored unloaded because you never know what situation they will be in where someone may be able to gain access to those guns. One thing I want to raise is the conversation that we hear, or the narrative that you need guns for self-defense, and if you own them because you have them for self-defense, you can't at the same time store them safely and have them immediately available. But there are many storage options that allow individuals, either through safes with codes or other biometric kinds of safes, where a gun owner could very quickly access a firearm if they actually needed it for a self-defense incident. For example, in my house, my husband and I store all of our guns in locked gun safes. All the guns are stored unloaded in that locked safe. Then we each have one small quick access gun safe that is bolted to our bed frame where we could gain access to a gun if we needed it. Thankfully, that has never been a case that has arisen. We also have a security system and a dog, right? We don't sort of just rely on ourselves thinking that we could protect ourselves if needed. We would certainly call 911 as well, but it's there if it was needed. And I just want to raise a point. So I have kids in the home. I'm also a gun owner. We store all of our guns safely because it's the responsible thing to do. We teach our kids gun safety. They know about when they should and shouldn't handle guns. They know what to do if they see one that's unsecured, but kids are curious and impulsive at times. And there's a reason why we don't let kids and teens make lots of life choices for themselves, right? Because they can't always be trusted to act in their own best interest. And so guns should always be stored safely when they're not being used. But also, if my house was ever broken into, my guns are in a huge safe or bolted to the bed. No one is going to be able to easily walk out of my home with guns. And I would hate for any of the guns I own to be ever used in crime. And so that's another motivator for safe storage. So you can move to the next slide. So I want to just talk a little bit about how we as individuals and communities can promote safe storage practices. There has sort of become a narrative that you either support gun ownership or you don't, and there's really no in between. And that has made, as I think was raised before, lots of people feel uncomfortable having conversations about guns and even safe gun storage, right? Of a responsible behavior that we think folks should engage in. And this has really impacted our ability to take a harm reduction approach to gun safety, the way we do with lots of other public health or health-related issues. And one way to start, if you have kids in the home or if you interact with kids, is to ask about guns in the home where your children are going to play, or if you send them to childcare, for example, and whether those guns are safely stored. So, for example, if your kid's going over to a friend's house to play, you could use data to broach the topic. Hey, I recently learned in a webinar that 35% of households with kids also have a gun in them. That's led me to start asking parents about it. Do you have guns in the home, and how are they stored? I know personally that's a question that I would be happy to answer, and there's survey research to support that also. I think around 90% of gun owners would be fine with someone asking about that in the context of safety for their children in particular. If we can normalize some of these conversations, make it just like any other safety topic, whether it's a pool or car seats or how medications are stored, we can make it a lot easier to have these conversations and everyone's going to be safer. We've been talking a lot about COVID-19 and sort of the unique time that we're in, and that is true. There are some unique stresses, but there are stresses that happen throughout life as well. Job loss, divorce, financial stress, social isolation, again, in particular right now. And it's really important to reach out to people in our social network or in our communities to see how folks are doing. And if you know that they own guns, ask them how those guns are stored. So for example, if you notice that a friend is in crisis, you might say something like, I've noticed you're having a tough time the last few weeks and I'm worried about you. I know you have guns in the home and I want to talk with you about how they're stored so that you can be safe during this difficult time. Are your guns stored locked up and separate from ammunition? If they're in a safe, could I or someone else hold on to the key until you're feeling better? And in some states, if you feel comfortable doing so, you may be able to temporarily hold their guns if they're at risk of harming themselves. So not everyone is comfortable bringing guns into the home. And so if that's not an option that you feel comfortable offering, some states have now developed off-site storage maps. And you can see on the right here the example that we created here in Maryland. There are also maps for Colorado and Washington, and many other are in the works. But this is a Google map that you can access that highlights gun shops and law enforcement agencies where people can opt into voluntary and temporary offsite gun storage to remove guns from their home if there's time of risk. Maybe grandparents have a grandchild coming over, and for that time they want to get the guns out of the house. So there's one thing that I want to highlight through this all is that be knowledgeable about options. You don't need to know the answer to every question, but know that there are options that folks can engage in because no one strategy is going to be right for everyone. And just bringing it back to the harm reduction approach, cars are dangerous, but we don't tell people not to drive, right? We say don't drive, pay attention while you're driving and don't drink and drive, right? We focus on these things we want to see people do. We need to really take this same harm reduction approach to gun ownership and be advancing and promoting safe gun storage. And we have to do this by having these conversations. And I will turn it over to Alex.
Great. So as we just talked about, it's really important to normalize having conversations. And when it comes to how do we as adults engage with youth on these important topics, we have a couple of programs. Again, Say Something is one of them that we use. So I'll talk about Say Something first. Again, we encourage students through Say Something to look for warning signs and threats, act immediately and take it seriously, and say something to an adult. And that is of any and all types of warning signs of any kind of violence or suicide. And one of the things that I like to talk about, particularly with adults when we talk about Say Something, is in the student-facing program, we talk quite a bit about the role that social media plays when it comes to them being able to see these types of things. Recently, Pew Research reported that 45% of teens say that they are online near constantly. So that's almost half of all teens are constantly online. So as adults, I think it is our responsibility to be able to engage with them in a conversation effectively about what they're seeing on social media and on the internet. So a couple of best practices just very quickly to kind of help us engage with what this idea of, social media literacy looks like for folks who maybe are not of the age where they feel comfortable having a TikTok account of their own. So I briefly want to talk about Snapchat. So in particular, when we talk about, hey, if you saw something on Snapchat, I want you to take a screenshot and send it to me. If you're an adult saying that to a student, the student may say, I feel uncomfortable taking a screenshot of a snap because Snapchat tells the original poster that a screenshot has been taken of their post. So having that back pocket recommendation of, hey, why don't we take a photo of the post that you're concerned about with another phone so that we have it, but then we haven't notified that original poster that that's what we're doing. Because we have had students, as I mentioned through our anonymous reporting system, say things like, I couldn't take a screenshot because I'm scared that that person's going to know that this is me who's turning them in. So we want to remove as many barriers as possible for a young person communicating with us about something that they've seen on Snapchat. If we have a situation that we're worried about being an emergency, Snapchat does have a super fun location sharing feature that, may seem alarming in terms of privacy, but can be useful in terms of engaging a dialogue about where a student is. So if we have a student or one of our children who's concerned about a friend or a classmate that doesn't necessarily know their address, we, again, through that social media literacy can ask, hey, do they have their location turned on Snapchat? And that might be able to help us pinpoint with a little more specificity before we call or alert emergency services. So again, I'm by no means saying that you need to sign up for and engage on every single social media platform out there, because it feels a bit like whack-a-mole these days. When one goes down, 7 more pop up. So I do think, though, it's really valuable to be able to engage with these conversations. One of the things that in my previous job, I was an adjunct professor at a university, and these students, and keep in mind, I thought I knew things about social media. I was vaguely close to their age group, felt really good about myself and my social media knowledge. But then one day I learned about Finstas, which are fake Instagram accounts. So students will have their main Instagram account where they post very lovely, wholesome, normal photos of, here's me and my golden retriever. But then they have a Finsta, which they only share with a select group of friends, which has far more insidious or worrisome content on it. So just being able to engage with the idea of what this is and what it means to students is super, super important. So that's kind of where the adult role of Say Something comes in. And then when we talk about youth leadership, because that's something that Sandy Hook Promise takes very seriously, we have Save Promise Clubs. And that stands for Students Against Violence Everywhere. And we want to educate, empower, engage, and encourage students to really take the messaging of our program and infuse them into their schools and communities. And I can't say enough about Safe Promise Clubs. We usually hold our National Youth Summit, and you leave that weekend feeling really good about the state of the world, because youth are very impressive and creative and make fantastic leaders. So not only are they fantastic in their own right, but I promise every one of our messages means so much more in a peer-to-peer communication style than it does coming from somebody who they may think is out of touch and doesn't understand where they're coming from. So again, you have the advocacy at sandyhookpromise.org email contact. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to use any of these programs.
Thanks, Alex. So speaking of conversations, we want to keep up the conversation with you as well. This is just the beginning of this particular one. So a couple of next steps for you. Make sure to keep up with us on social. Speaking of social media, it also is a great tool to keep you in the loop on our programs, our upcoming webinar series, and content around safe storage. So whether that means that there's a new piece of legislation being introduced that we're advocating for and we want you to take action on, that's where you'll find out. Or whether there are new versions of our programs available that you can have access to, that's a great place to find out as well. So you can see our handles here, Sandy Hook Promise on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, a great way to keep in touch and follow up with our updates. If this has inspired you to take on more, congratulations, first of all, but we also encourage you to sign up as a Promise Leader. Promise Leaders are elevated volunteers who take more action in advocating for Sandy Hook Promise's mission of protecting children, preventing violence, and keeping students safe. You can visit sandyhookpromise.org/volunteer against gun violence to find out more about that. It's a wonderful way to stay involved at an elevated level and take on more leadership within our organization. You can also follow our partners online, the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research, as well as Ethan's Law, are two partners we're very proud to have had on this presentation, and hope you continue to keep up the dialogue with them. You can find them on social at those two handles as well. We have, just looking at the time now, about 3 minutes to answer a couple questions. If you have a question, we encourage you to put it into the question box on the side of your screen or email us at advocacy@sandyhookpromise.org. You see that contact us screen up there right now as well. These are, we want to be able to answer your questions and share a little bit more. One question I want to select with the time that we have left is actually for Alex. A good question that often comes up that someone posed to the group as well is, would say something, do we ever face, quote, the snitch culture, or concerns that the tipster will know who they are, or know who told, that they'll face some sort of repercussion or retaliation? Can you speak on that a little bit?
I am happy to speak on that, and thrilled to report that we absolutely do talk about that in Say Something, because that is easily one of the biggest concerns, regardless of the vernacular that they use. They are concerned that their friend is going to get mad at them, or that they are going to be in some sort of danger for bringing a concern forward. And so we do this in a couple of ways. One, we do create, we have the anonymous reporting system, so we create that safe space for them to anonymously bring this forward. And two, we like to remind them that, saying something to an adult and running the risk of a friend potentially being angry with you is sure a very valid concern, but the safety of you, your friend, and your peers far outweighs that concern. So we try to find kind ways to say that it is more important to save a life, your life or your friend's life, than to have that friend be angry with you. So we talk about that with violence of all kinds, and in particular, we're developing a suicide prevention module, and we speak specifically to it in that program as well. So we do bring that messaging very strongly with Say Something. Great question.
Excellent. We're going to ask one final question to Dr. Crifasi. There's actually a couple questions that I'm going to try and combine together, but is there any data or information to explain perhaps why some gun owners might not feel comfortable with laws requiring safe storage and training, and what types of conversations or information we could provide to help them get there?
Yes, so I think there's a pushback to the point on training. There's a pushback on anything that's mandatory. There's a strong perception among many gun owners that there's sort of personal responsibility. And if you are going to own guns, you should take it upon yourself to get training and store your guns safely. And there's sort of the very libertarian sort of opinion that the government should be very small and not telling me what to do in my home. Unfortunately, there are going to be folks that are going to be harder to reach than others, but there are a very broad swath of folks who might just not be knowledgeable on what it means to have a policy like this. Again, that's why we try to get super specific on what exactly we're asking for. But that can be a hesitation, that sort of sense of personal responsibility, and that folks shouldn't be telling gun owners what to do. But I think when you engage the frame of safety, particularly with regard to children or regard to like theft and guns being available in the underground market, that can be an effective way to engage in a conversation when sort of listening back for their response.
Great. All right, well, that we will wrap up. It's 1 o'clock exactly. I know many of you asked questions that we weren't able to get to. So again, our email address at advocacy@sandyhookpromise.org. Please direct your questions there. We'd be more than happy to direct them to the right person and get you an answer. Lots of really great questions. And we hope this was informative. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. You know that especially now, folks have even busier lives than usual and time is very precious. But we really appreciate you being a part of this conversation. We hope to see you at our next webinar taking place next Wednesday at this exact same time on youth wellness at home as part of this wellness series during the month of May. And on behalf of all the speakers and all of you, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.